Our top story, Iran says a major issue in any talks to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal will be ways to verify the removal of anti-Tehran sanctions. Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian said his country demands necessary guarantees for the implementation of commitments by the Western parties to the accord. Iran and the remaining signatories to the JCPOA have so far held 6 rounds of talks for the restoration of the deal. The Islamic Republic is set to announce a date for the 7th round in the coming weeks. Tehran says a deal can only be saved if all sanctions are removed and all parties return to full compliance with their respective obligations. And joining us for some extended coverage on this is David Yahubian, professor of history, joining us from Cal State University, San Bernardino, California, and Mr. Max Parry, independent investigative journalist, joining us from New York. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program. Professor Yahubian, we're going to start with you. Your initial thoughts, where we stand in the JCPOA revival talks right now, and Iran's stance on everything.
I think it's very positive that the Iranian government has taken the time to assess what actually happened in the 6 rounds of talks between April and June 20th of 2021, and that it has decided that returning to negotiate with the P4+1 would be beneficial. And that's so far as the assessment has been taken. Regarding this issue, though, of verification, which I think is going to be critical if Iran is going to make the decision to return to the JCPOA. Of course, Iran has maintained its commitments under the JCPOA, but to continue to maintain its commitments is going to be absolutely essential that some sort of symmetry is brought to bear on the agreement, because right now it's a completely asymmetrical agreement. There is a robust, by all accounts, verifying mechanism through the IAEA, which keeps constant tabs on Iran's civilian nuclear energy program. It would only be fitting and, to put it simply, fair for the United States illegal sanctions regime to be put under its own verification mechanism. Otherwise, there is simply no symmetry within the agreement. And I applaud the Iranian government for having stayed in the agreement and lived up to all of its commitments for 14 months after the Trump administration unilaterally pulled out in May of 2018, and of course, Iran exercised its legal rights under the agreement under Articles 26 and 36 to begin to, let's say, pull back on some of its commitments that it made under the agreement. But moving forward, it's clear that unless Iran can create a mechanism that will be able to verify not only the lifting of sanctions, but also things such as the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control threatening countries and threatening companies if they do business, there needs to be a mechanism that can verify that the United States is actually dropping its illegal draconian sanctions, and that the OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control, is not engaging in the continual dirty business of trying to scare companies and countries off from investment or business dealings with Iran.
All right, David, good stuff. And Max Parry, I'd like to welcome you to the program. Now, Max, the Biden administration, does it have the desire, does it have the will to revive the JCPOA? And even more important than that, I mean, we know that Joe Biden is at right now for his tenure record low approval rating. Does he have the position to sell this to lawmakers and his cronies?
Well, it's pretty difficult to be optimistic that there's going to be any sea change in Washington with the Biden regime, which seems pretty dead set on playing just this endless game of chicken here. Biden claims he prefers diplomacy, but thus far he's shown virtually no policy difference from his predecessor in the sense that, the administration has refused to lift the sanctions that were imposed by the Trump administration in 2018 after unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA. But I think it's important to consider the current context in which the prospect of a return to negotiations in Vienna is taking place, and that is that it's occurring, amid this debacle of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and subsequent takeover by the Taliban, which not only stunned the world, but it's the fallout of that has been that U.S. regional hegemony has just been completely debilitated, and it's that has very big implications for the Iran nuclear deal talks, because it's becoming more and more difficult for Washington and its NATO proxies to portray their military adventures as successful, where on every front, whether it's in Afghanistan or their dirty wars in Syria and Yemen, they've been unsuccessful, and they've been bogged down and hampered and defeated, whether militarily or financially, depleting trillions from the Treasury with nothing to show for it in the case of Afghanistan. So I'm not optimistic that the Biden administration is really committed to the JCPOA, but I think that the fact that Iran has overcome Washington's continuous efforts to destabilize Tehran because of its autarkic and resolute political system, and clearly the Iranian people felt they were ready for a change of course with the election of Raisi, who's much less disingenuous than his predecessor, and they've made it abundantly clear what their red line is, and has stuck up for Iran's sovereignty, and has made it very clear that any placation on Tehran's part going forward with these negotiations is totally unacceptable, and that no changes to the accord can be made if it's going to be re-implemented between the two sides.
Thank you, Max. And David, I want to put that same question to you, pretty much, but slightly different. I mean, Joe Biden, obviously, he's going to try to, if he's serious, his administration, about the revival of this thing, he has to try to basically tailor it to get a win out of it in the eyes of his fellow cohorts out there in Washington. So my question to you, how does he do that? How does he sell this thing where he gets a win? I mean, we already know if he does get serious about revival, it's going to be about, we have to, push every option that at our means to keep Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. He's going to probably play that to the last beat. But how do you see him basically tailoring the revival so he gets a win out of it, Iran gets a win out of it, and this thing gets revived, David?
Unfortunately, Daniel, to be honest, I've become very pessimistic. I share Max Parry's pessimism regarding the ability of the Biden administration to get back to the agreement. And I frankly don't think that President Biden has either the political capital or the political will to expand on the JCPOA. And so in conjunction with the Iranian government's assessment of the overall relevance and importance of these negotiations in Vienna, I think it's critically important that the Raisi government has instead emphasized the analysis of going forward without the JCPOA, because unfortunately this is really where at least I'm at currently regarding the agreement. I do not think that the United States at this point, unfortunately, is going to return to the JCPOA. We're going to see the same shenanigans. We're going to see the same continued imposition of sanctions and lack of goodwill gestures, such as allowing Iran to access COVID vaccines, as well as its own funds, such as the $10 billion, which the United States just recently stated that it would not release. And so there is a new power dynamic afoot and a new equilibrium that is being created within Asia. This has to do with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This, of course, as Max Parry described, has to do with the disastrous U.S. 20-year occupation of Afghanistan and its horrific pullout. And so it's encouraging that the Raisi administration has focused on the potential of going forward without the JCPOA, because I do not think that the Biden administration has the ability, has the political capital, or the political will.
All right, we have about less than a minute left. Max, your final thoughts, please.
Well, I would just like to point out, you know, not just this debacle from Afghanistan, the context that all this is taking place, but just the unbelievable hubris of Washington here, given that it's, you know, claiming that it wants to limit nuclear proliferation, even as it is inking this, you know, very controversial nuclear submarine deal with Australia and the UK, which has obviously infuriated its ally in the French. I mean, what moral leverage, what moral leg does the U.S. have to stand on to criticize Iran for daring to enrich uranium at 60%, which it only began doing after the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA? What leverage does it have to criticize Iran just as it signs this security pact to provide nuclear-powered submarines to Australia? I mean, the arrogance of the West is just incredible here. So, you know, the U.S. is, I think, you know, even its own allies like the French are finding out that the U.S. is not committed and has no loyalty to anybody, and it just cannot commit to any of its accords or agreements, whether it's the Iran nuclear deal or even supplying nuclear power submarines to its own supposed allies.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both. And to your point, Max, and the technology they're going to give Canberra for those nuclear power submarines is above 90% enrichment. They're going to teach them how to do that. Well, and it's funny, the hypocrisy there you alluded to. Thank you both. It's always great to check in with both of you. David Yaroubian there out of sunny California, and Max Parry there joining us from overcast New York.